Sunday, March 12th, 2018. Welcome to V10 Sports, and we're going to talk about the Week 9 CFL report. I don't know. So, I went 3-0 on my picks. Not bad. I even predicted the upset of BC over Edmonton. Winnipeg beat Hamilton, and Ottawa barely beat Montreal, but Johnny Manziel played a little bit better. So we're going to get into all these games, but now I am officially 11-7 on the year of picking games since I started doing this. So I'm coming back right now. 11-7. That's not terrible. So I actually went 3-0 on the picks. We'll start off with BC versus Edmonton. I kind of felt like BC with that week off, and they had been playing a lot better. Would have the advantage in this game, and they did. They looked like a very rested team. They looked very good. And Lulay, he was 16 of 29, which was a little over 50% touchdown and an INT for 239 yards. He looked good again. They don't have much of a running game in BC right now, but their defense was fairly good. They sacked Riley 3 times. And even intercepted him a couple more. So the BC Lions played very well. And it's not that Riley didn't play good. 26 of 41 for 302 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 INTs. Gable ran the ball relatively well, 10 times for 51 yards. And Walker had 5 catches for 117. But BC looks pretty good. They look like they might be starting to get some momentum. They gave Calgary all they could handle in their previous game, and that's an undefeated Calgary Stampeders team. And BC gave them all they could handle, and I think it was in Calgary. So this team is improving, and I think Lulay, since coming into the starting lineup, has been phenomenal for them. He's played extremely well. If you actually look at Lulay's stats for the season. He's 62% throwing, and he's thrown for 1171, 5 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. They're not putting up a ton of points, but they did face the best defense in Calgary 2 weeks ago. Edmonton's defense is not bad either. It's just they're not really a team that BC isn't going to score you a ton of points, but they did put up 31. I like BC. I like where they're going. I like their coach Buono. I like him, and it was funny because I was looking at something, and I guess The Rock played for Buono. He played for him because The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, played Canadian football, so he played for him. And I guess The Rock put out something that was thanking Buono for being a mentor and all that other stuff, and it was kind of cool to see because, The Rock comes in and he's going, it's like, oh, there's Canadian football on my TV, and it's a giant TV, But, yeah, he's just watching some Canadian football, and it was the BC Lions versus Edmonton. So it was kind of cool. But BC, I think, is gaining momentum. Next week, BC plays Toronto in Toronto. Probably early on, I'd say that BC probably wins that game. The next game was Friday night, Hamilton versus Winnipeg. Once again, I think Hamilton was coming off of a super high, having a great game against their former, backup quarterback Manziel. I think they were just super high, and I think that this game was just going to be a letdown for them. And even though Hamilton has a good team, in my opinion, they weren't going to beat Winnipeg in Winnipeg. Nichols was effective, 13 of 24, a couple of touchdowns, no interceptions. Harris ran the ball pretty effectively, 16 carries for 82 yards. Nobody really stood out receiving. In fact, Harris was their leading receiver, too, with 4 catches for 46 yards. But Nichols has been a steadying force ever since he's come back, and Winnipeg has played noticeably better. So that really puts Winnipeg at 5-3, and they're still third in the West. And Hamilton at 3-5 is still second in the East, which just shows you that East is still, still kind of a mess. But Masoli played well. 17 of 17 of 21 or 17 of 27, 251 yards and a touch. He was also their leading rusher, 7 carries for 80 yards. They did have Green he had 2 touchdowns and 63 yards, so they were pretty effective. Banks had 106 yards receiving and a touch. It's not that Hamilton played bad, it's just that Winnipeg played better. Winnipeg did sack Masoli 4 times. So, this becomes a little bit tougher for Masoli when he's under a little bit of pressure. He's getting sacked. He gets sacked 4 times. So Winnipeg moves to 5-3, and the weird part is it's only good for third in the West. Of course, second in the West is Edmonton with the same amount of points and the same record. So they must have a tiebreaker over them or something. But they're right there with Edmonton. Unfortunately, it still puts them 3 games back, I think, of Calgary, which is, kind of sucks. But actually, I don't know where that puts them. Yeah, Calgary's in the West. So, of course, that leaves us with the last game. Montreal at Ottawa. I picked Ottawa to win it, but Montreal was giving them all they could handle. If you look, after 3 quarters, Montreal was up 17-11. So Montreal was getting turnovers. Montreal was getting some breaks. Manziel played good. No interceptions, which was good. He ran the ball only one more time than he did the previous week, but this time he had 36 yards rushing. And he almost had a touchdown, except for he fumbled on the one, and one of his guys recovered it, which was good. But that would have been a little bit disastrous. But Montreal was giving Ottawa all they could handle, and this is what leads me to always saying that East, Ottawa is, to me, they're an average team, and if they were in the West, they might be struggling a lot more, but because they're facing Montreal and Toronto and Hamilton, who all have losing records, and that's their main competition, Ottawa will probably still be able to run away with this division, although I think Hamilton can close the gap, and it also is going to depend on how well McLeod Bethel-Thompson plays going forward for Toronto. And it also will still depend on how well Manziel plays. But this was a winnable game for Montreal in Ottawa. There's still kind of this lack of protection, and Manziel still looks like he has to scramble around a lot, but it definitely looks like the defense came to play. The defense really was harassing. They were harassing Harris, I think, most of the night. But Harris, look at Harris's numbers. It's probably okay. So it's probably not that Montreal was harassing him. They were getting some turnovers at key moments. And I think they had a punt return for a touchdown, Montreal did. So it wasn't that the Montreal offense was really doing anything. But Harris was 44 of 54 for 487 yards. Yikes. And Powell finally came back. He had 3 or 4 straight games where he was rushing for, 2 yards a carry. And he had a bounce back game, 17 carries for 104 yards. But Montreal, they gave up over 600 yards of offense. They really did. So I guess the defense didn't play that good. But the defense was being opportunistic. There was a turnover. I think they caused a fumble. I think they took one back if you look at how Montreal scored, they had an interception return for a touchdown. And they had a rushing touchdown. But I think they were probably doing bend, don't break type of stuff. But Ottawa wins this game. Manziel doesn't play bad. 16 of 26, 168 yards, no touchdowns, no INTs. Rushes the ball 3 times for 36 yards. Almost had a touchdown, but instead he kind of fumbled, and somebody else gets credit for the touchdown. But Manziel played better. He really did. So it looks like he was a little bit more comfortable. And I think it was June Jones that said it's not that Manziel made a lot of bad reads. It was just that there were some players that were out of place and a lot of pressure on Manziel from the defense. So, and even he said it's not that Manziel was making a ton of bad mistakes. It was just, it's like even Manziel said, it was everything that could go wrong did go wrong. In this game, they had a few more things go right. Manziel played a lot more solid, and I think going forward, you're going to continue to see Manziel improve. You're going to continue to see, I think, the Montreal offense will slightly improve. Their leading receiver, they had 5 catches for 61 yards. So I think that at some point, we're going to see Manziel get that first touchdown pass here pretty soon. Probably, if not this week, maybe next week. In Edmonton, that'll be a tall order, but I think that we can safely say that Manziel has still got a lot to learn, because the CFL and the NFL are vastly different games. But Manziel looks like he took a little bit better care of the football, and they seemingly were able to give him a few more opportunities, to really get out there and show what he could do. I still think there are still holes at the skill positions that they are going to need, and they're talking about re-signing a guy named Deron Carter that got released by the Rough Riders. So I'm not so sure if that's actually going to happen or not. But they've been talking about kind of Deron Carter. This would give him another, wide receiver. It would give another weapon to Carter. He had 1,043 yards and 8 touchdowns in the 2017 season. And he plays cornerback too. So, he can only help that team, but I guess he's had a few off the field issues. I don't know if you really want to put that guy next to Manziel, but if he can keep his head on straight and he's going back to a familiar place, by what I understand, maybe that gives Johnny another weapon, and maybe this can kind of be a redemption story for both of them. But I guess Deron Carter, it's some off the field stuff, and they said and this is the thing I hate, lack of effort. They say that it looks like there was a lack of effort on Deron Carter's part. So that to me scares me more. The off the field stuff is scary, but when you're on the field and that's usually your sanctuary as a football player, and you decide to not, or it just looks like you're not giving it your all, that's where it starts to worry. Maybe there's a few more things happening in his head than just some off the field issues. He might need some serious help, because he's not using the football field as a sanctuary to get away from his troubles or the troubles he's creating, and he's not getting better off the field. So I don't know a lot about Deron Carter, and I'm not going to speculate on much of anything with him. All I can do is go off of what I read over here, and supposedly it has to do with some off-field issues that Saskatchewan released him, and a lack of effort, or a perceived lack of effort. So maybe coming back to Montreal, coming back to a familiar place will reignite him. So let me know what you think. Do you think that Deron Carter could help, Montreal? Were you a little bit more impressed with how Montreal played? The defense seemed to play opportunistic, I guess. They didn't really play well, giving up over 600 yards, but they were a little bit more opportunistic, and it looked like when you're down 17-11 going into the fourth, you do have to kind of sling it a little bit more. So it looks like that's what Harris did, and came up with a huge night, yardage wise. Not so much anywhere else, because like I said, his final stats were, you look at him, 487 yards, and he had 1 touchdown and 1 interception. Usually you put up 487 yards, you hope you have 3 or 4 touchdowns with that, but I still think this Montreal team has got some growing to do. But that was a pretty good effort. They looked like they didn't have a lot of quit in them. I just think towards the end of the game, Ottawa shows that there is still more talent on the Red Blacks team than there is on the Alouettes. So I think ultimately more talent finally beat out scrappiness, which I think is probably the best way to describe Montreal's effort. It was scrappy. And, you know, what you like to see first is effort. And I saw a little bit more effort out of that team. Of course, you know, there's always going to be those times where you kind of, you know, question some of it, but it looked like, it looked like there was, they looked like they were a little bit more on board, and it looked like they had a couple more times where they looked a little, you know, the game wasn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I saw some glimpses of improvement, and that's what you need to see week to week to week. You just want to see little increments of improvement. This is the worst team in the CFL right now, so you're not going to get great games from a lot of these guys, but what you want to see is little increments of improvement. Little lights that are coming on at the end of the tunnel that show that this team has potential, can get better, might get better, and maybe next season, with a few free agent pickups maybe, and switching some things around, and some other players get some more experience, and and maybe you make a couple of pretty good draft picks, this team could really improve. And especially as long as I see Johnny continue to improve every single week, a dynamic player like that can make a huge difference. He really can. And if you have a dynamic player with a lot of other players that are starting to get a little bit better, maybe by next season you could have a lot of players that are good with a dynamic player like Johnny, which can open the doors for the Alouettes to be something very special next season. I think this season's almost a wash. I'm not going to call it a complete failure yet, because I don't know. You get on a winning streak and you might be able to pull off a playoff spot. You might be able to get yourself in there. But I'm not going to predict that right now for Montreal. I need to see probably 3-4 wins in a row before I say, yeah, that team's ready to get into the playoffs. But right now I'm just going to say I saw some improvements, and that's what I wanted to see. I saw Johnny go from 4 interceptions to 0 interceptions. So that right there is a major improvement. It's like not throwing a single pick, and he threw 20 some odd passes. I mean, that is the good news right there. It's like he threw 26 passes and didn't have one of them picked off. You remember the last game, he threw 20 passes and had 4 of them picked off. So that's not good. So this time he threw more passes, less interceptions. I think that first touchdown will happen next week. I really do. I think he's finally going to get it. Whether it's running or throwing, he'll get that first one. And we'll see if Montreal signs Deron Carter. We'll see if he makes a difference in that wide receiving core at all. And maybe in that defensive backfield. Because given a 487 yards throwing, you might need a little bit of help back there too. So let me know what you think in the comments below. With all that being said, to the troops, past, present, and future, thanks for the freedom.